April 11th, 1866, 9 o'clock in the evening. Rain slid down the soot-stained glass of 28 Cannon Street, like ink bleeding through parchment. The heart of Victorian London's commercial district had grown still, save for the distant echo of a horse-drawn cab splashing through rainwater, its wheels rattling against slick cobblestones. The air smelled of damp leather and coal smoke, that familiar, choking perfume of a city that burned day and night. Gas lamps flickered weakly under the relentless downpour, their dim halos casting trembling shadows across the brass nameplate of Messrs. Bennington leather sellers, merchants, men of trade and tradition, proud and immovable since 1702. Behind the stone facade of the four-story building, the world felt paused in time. Inside, the showroom below was shuttered and dark, inventory locked away in heavy drawers, the scent of tanned hides lingering like memory. Upstairs, in a room lit by the warm breath of the hearth, Sarah Milson sat with a servant girl named Elizabeth Lowe. The two women, wrapped in wool shawls, nursed cups of tea from china too fine for servants but borrowed nonetheless. Sarah, nearing 60, bore the air of someone whose every footstep had worn a groove into the house itself. 7 years she'd walked these halls, knew where the wood creaked under the weight of a lie, where drafts whispered secrets no one wanted spoken aloud. Outside, thunder rumbled like distant drums, but inside it was calm. Until the bell rang. A piercing metallic ring cut through the silence, sharp and out of place, like a scream behind glass. Both women startled. Elizabeth flinched, her teacup clinking against its saucer, but it was Sarah who froze entirely, candlelight catching the strange tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes. She stood slowly, and something about her voice seemed suddenly ancient, hollowed out by old recognition. "You lookin' bad. I know who it is," she murmured, almost to herself. And just like that, she rose, tightened the collar of her dress, and reached for the heavy brass candle holder on the mantel. The gas lights in the stairwell were nearly useless, forever dim to save money, so she carried her own flame. Elizabeth watched her go, watched her pass from the orange glow of the hearth into the waiting mouth of shadow. Then she was gone. Sarah moved down the servants' stairwell, the cold biting her fingers, the silence pressing against her temples. She passed the small office where Mr. Bevington conducted his daily dealings, past the shuttered display windows, the mahogany counters and cabinets lined with finely stitched wallets, gloves, and satchels. The scent of polish, of beeswax and old paper, hung like a warning. She paused at the front door. Beyond it, rain thrashed against the stone steps, and then she opened it. Upstairs, Elizabeth sat alone. The fire whispered, the clock ticked, and nothing else moved. She didn't panic, not at first. Sarah often met delivery boys or messengers, even in foul weather. A mistake with inventory, a late invoice, normal things. But time passed. Minutes folded into silence. 10, 20, 30. Elizabeth stared into the fire, the flames dancing like spirits trapped behind glass. At the mark of 1 hour, something inside her twisted, a knot of dread, slow and cold. She called out, once, softly, then louder, "Mrs. Milson?" Her voice trailed off into the void. No answer. Lighting her own candle with trembling hands, Elizabeth stepped into the stairwell. Darkness swallowed the narrow space, shadows like smudges on her vision. She descended slowly, each footfall more hesitant than the last. The silence was thick, unnatural, as though the house itself were holding its breath. And then she saw her. Sarah Milson lay sprawled across the checkered tiles of the entry hall, her body twisted, eyes half-lidded and fixed on nothing. A pool of blood, deep, dark, and impossibly wide, crept from beneath her like a second shadow. It was the kind of blood that told stories. It soaked into the grout, into the cracks of the building, and in that moment, the air shifted. Elizabeth didn't scream. She couldn't. Her voice had left her. Something ancient and predatory had stepped across the threshold that night, and it hadn't left. But this wasn't just a tragic death. No, it was the opening page of something deeper, darker, something the polite people of London would not speak of in drawing rooms or afternoon letters, because Sarah Milson's murder was never solved. No suspect, no witnesses, no motive. Only the blood and the silence. Coroner's report was brief, clinical, a sharp blow to the back of the skull, no sign of forced entry, no robbery. The police asked questions but answered none. Elizabeth's testimony was dismissed as nervous exaggeration, a fall, perhaps, an accident. But those who knew the building knew better. Bevington's was old, and like many buildings of its time, it held things older still. Within days of Sarah's death, rumors began to ripple through the district. Traders swore they saw figures moving behind the upper windows at night. A constable on patrol claimed he heard weeping from behind the locked doors. And Elizabeth, poor Elizabeth, never stepped foot inside the building again. She left London entirely, vanishing into the gray mist of history, her name lost to time. But the building remained. And then, in 1871, it happened again. A junior clerk, name redacted from surviving ledgers, was found dead at his desk, a deep gash across his throat, his own letter opener lodged between the pages of a ledger. No sign of struggle, no entry point. Just another silent corpse. And the same thick pool of blood. People began to whisper about Bevington's, about the man who founded it, Thomas Bevington, who, it was said, made his fortune not just with leather but with strange contracts inked in secrecy during the Great Fire of 1666. There were tales of human skin used in bindings, of rituals performed in the basement vaults, of apprentices who vanished and were never spoken of again. The stories were old, passed from porter to porter, clerk to clerk, but no one truly believed them until they did. Because when you look at the census records, quiet, dusty little things stored in archives long forgotten, you start to notice patterns. Every 7 years, someone died inside 28 Cannon Street. Not always violently. Sometimes it was sickness, sudden and unexplained. Sometimes it was suicide. But always there was blood. And always there were whispers. London has long been a city built on bones. Roman ruins lie beneath coffee shops, plague pits beneath playgrounds. Churches built atop burned-out tenements, and buildings like Bevington's, they are more than just places of commerce. They are containers for memory, for pain, for things no one dares name aloud. Some say the past is dead, but walk the streets of this city after midnight, and you'll know that's not true. The past is alive, and sometimes it waits in silence. Sometimes it rings the bell. The weeks after Sarah Milson's death passed like a smothered breath. Quiet, dense, and heavy with questions no one dared speak aloud. Officially, the city moved on. London, ever hungry, devoured tragedy and digested it into silence. Mr. Bevington returned to his offices with the same stiff posture, the same silver-tipped cane, the same faint perfume of tobacco and rosewater that clung to his coat. Business resumed, letters were posted, orders fulfilled. Leather gloves sold to the wives of bankers and politicians, stitched by hands now too afraid to speak. But the house had changed. The building felt colder, the gas lamps burned lower, and the servants, those who hadn't already fled, spoke less. Something unseen had settled into the cracks of the wood, the grain of the walls, and it watched, always watched. Those who lived through it said the very air inside 28 Cannon Street began to feel wrong. Not evil, exactly, just misaligned, like the walls no longer followed geometry, like the windows looked out onto something that wasn't quite London. Elizabeth Lowe, before she vanished, told one priest that the mirrors in the building began reflecting things that weren't there. Shadows that didn't belong to anyone. candles that flickered when no wind moved. But she was young, and in Victorian England young women were often dismissed as hysterical, especially when grief tightened around their throats. She fled in the night 2 weeks after Sarah's funeral, leaving her belongings behind. Her last letter, found tucked into a hymnal in St. James's Church, simply read, "It's still here." What was still there? That question lingered like smoke, never spoken above a whisper. The Bevington family, staunch Anglicans, highly respected merchants, never publicly acknowledged anything unusual, but privately, diaries tell another story. In 1872, an entry from Edgar Bevington, the founder's grandson, reads, "The walls breathe when I sleep, and last night I awoke to find the ledger open to the page Sarah died on." I hadn't touched it. He would later be institutionalized. Diagnosis: melancholia, complicated by morbid spiritualism. He hanged himself in his cell 3 months later. The house grew quiet again, but not still. Workers rotated frequently, none staying more than a season. One night in the winter of 1880, the night porter disappeared. His coat was found on the banister. His shoes, still warm just inside the door, but the man himself, gone, as if the walls had swallowed him whole. And so, a new rumor began to fester, that the building itself was haunted not by a ghost, but by something older, something without name or shape, not the restless spirit of Sarah Milson, or some lingering soul seeking justice. No, this thing was different. It didn't mourn, it didn't scream in the dark or move objects to be noticed. It waited, watched, chose. In 1887, Bevingtons took on a new partner, a man named Albert Finlow, a rising leather trader known for his charm and cruelty. He purchased partial ownership in a deal many called rushed, even reckless. Within weeks of moving into his upstairs office, he began keeping the shutters closed, refusing to meet clients anywhere but the showroom floor, and then, abruptly, he stopped coming in altogether. When his body was found in his lodgings on Chiswell Street, it had already begun to rot. But it wasn't the state of his body that chilled the coroner. It was what lay on his chest. A strip of fine calfskin stitched with exacting care, and burned into it a name: Sarah. No tool could have made the marks, and the stitching didn't match anything the firm ever sold. No one claimed responsibility. The death was ruled suicide. By 1890, Bevington's reputation had curdled. Clients pulled their accounts, apprentices refused placement. The final blow came when a fire broke out one summer night in the storeroom, strange in its behavior, strange in its selectivity. The fire consumed nothing but a single cabinet of ledger books and one corner of the basement, leaving the rest untouched. Fire inspectors were baffled. No cause could be determined. But in the ashes they found something peculiar. A circle of burned leather, perfectly formed, inlaid with 7 runic markings. No one could read them. Scholars from the British Museum were called in. Some thought the symbols predated Latin. Others said they were Norse. One insisted they were not meant to be read, but felt. He died 2 weeks later in a carriage accident on his way home. His notes were lost. It was then that a theory began to form, not among police or clergy, but in the quiet, ink-stained margins of history journals and whispered meetings between occultists. The building, they said, was never just a place of trade. It was a vessel, an anchor, a mouth that had been forced shut for nearly 2 centuries, and now hung open. Stories surfaced from the building's earliest days, before Bevington, before the commercial boom, back when Cannon Street was still Candlewick Street. It was said that during the plague years, a chapel once stood on that ground, a place where mass burials were held in secret. The clergy, overwhelmed, began using the crypts below for rituals not sanctioned by any church. The goal was not healing, it was preservation, a way to seal off death itself, contain it, trap it beneath stone and mortar. The location was cursed, some claimed, not because of sin, but because it worked. The ritual worked. But the seal weakened, and when Bevington's was built, conveniently just above the old chapel's ruins, the curse reawakened. They said the founders knew that the Bevington name was chosen not as a legacy, but a shield, that every ledger written, every coin traded, every life lost within those walls fed the seal, fed the thing beneath. Not a ghost, not a demon, something more abstract. An idea, perhaps. A hunger shaped by belief, by ritual, by repetition. Sarah Milson wasn't its first victim. She was simply the first whose death was noticed. Because here's what history does. It buries the truth in bureaucracy, in fire, in polite silence, but it leaves behind pieces, fragments that don't fit cleanly into official stories, scorch marks that don't match any flame, ledgers that won't stay shut, names stitched into things that should not have memory. And still, the building stands. If you go to Cannon Street today, number 28 no longer bears the Bevington name. It's been converted, renovated, whitewashed by time. Offices now, clean lines, glass, light. But there are records, quiet, unpublicized ones, of strange events. Employees who complain of sudden vertigo, of dreams involving drowning in blood, of hearing a bell ring on nights when no one is at the door. And once every 7 years a vacancy opens. They say some places never forget, that the stone remembers what the tongue dares not speak, and though centuries shift, names fade and paint is laid over rot, the truth lies curled in the walls, waiting for the moment to open its eyes again. 7 years. That's all it ever needed. And in the spring of 1897, right on schedule, it did. Her name was Lydia Pembroke, a clerk's daughter raised on stories of empire and decorum, who had neither the fortune for luxury nor the resignation for servitude. She was sharp, independent, and above all, curious, which in London's endless web of hidden doors and unsolved histories was often a fatal trait. She accepted a position as junior secretary in one of the new businesses housed within the newly refurbished 28 Cannon Street. By now, Bevington's was long gone. The signage had changed, the interior walls gutted and replaced, the building rebranded, scrubbed of its leather and ledger past. But Lydia knew the stories. Everyone did. And that was part of the appeal. For the first week, everything was perfectly normal. Clean desks, polished floors, brass elevators that hummed when they should. But Lydia noticed the things that others didn't. The way the light bulbs above the reception flickered on foggy days. The way no one, not even the cleaning staff, would enter the stairwell after dark. The way her supervisor, Mr. Alton, always paused before walking into the archive room, as if silently asking permission. It began, as all curses do, with something small. Lydia was filing invoices late one evening when she found a folder that didn't belong. Thick parchment, handmade ink, no date, no return address. Inside, a single phrase repeated over and over. It ends when the circle breaks. Nothing else. She asked around. No one claimed it. She checked the logs. No courier had delivered anything that day. But she didn't throw it away. She kept it in her desk drawer, like a charm, or a warning. The next night, the dream started. She saw Sarah Milson, drenched, pale, her mouth moving soundlessly. She stood in the lobby, on the same checkered floor where her body had once bled out like spilled ink. Around her, the shadows shifted, breathed. Behind her, a door opened that Lydia had never seen in waking life. Wooden, arched, bound in iron. Lydia awoke gasping. She tried to reason with it. Stress, perhaps, a product of late nights, too much coffee. She kept coming to work, but the building began to change. She started hearing the bell, the same sharp ring that split the silence in 1866. Not every night, just on the seventh day, always at 9 p.m., always when she was alone. And then there was the ledger. It appeared on her desk one morning without explanation. The leather binding looked hand-stitched. The paper inside was aged, brittle, the ink faded, but the entries were clear. Names, dates, causes of death, all lined up. Some were familiar. Sarah Milson, Albert Finlow, Edgar Bevington. But others hadn't happened yet. Her own name was listed, dated exactly 7 days from the day she found the book. Throat opened, circle intact. She brought it to Mr. Alton. He laughed nervously, told her she had a wild imagination. But later that night, she saw him pacing outside the archive room, muttering to himself. She waited until he left and crept back in. And that's when she saw a circle burned into the floor beneath a rug. Same markings, same diameter, same eerie symmetry. 7 sigils surrounding a central seal that pulsed faintly, as if reacting to her presence. She felt nauseous, dizzy. It was like standing at the edge of a great pit, one that pulled not just at your body but your memory, your sense of self. She began to dig deeper, archives, old letters, forgotten maps, and she discovered what no one else had managed to piece together. The original chapel beneath 28 Cannon Street had never been fully destroyed. When the Great Fire of London swept through in 1666, it consumed the upper structure, but the crypts remained, sealed, undisturbed, and it was there, beneath layers of stone and ash, that the first circle had been carved. Not a protection, a prison. The monks who built it weren't trying to invite something. They were trying to trap it, a consciousness, a hunger older than scripture, something birthed during plague and war, fed by death, sealed away by blood and ritual. But every time the building was rebuilt, every time the circle was disturbed, it weakened, and so it fed. Every 7 years, one death, to keep the gate from swinging wide, to keep the seal from failing entirely. Sarah had known. That's why she said, "I know who it is." It wasn't a visitor. It was the debt. Lydia had 7 days. She did what no one else before her had dared. She attempted to break the pattern. She gathered salt, ash, sacred texts. She copied the circle, tried to decode the sigils. She spoke to priests, to occultists, to skeptics. No one believed her. Some warned her. Most simply backed away. On the 7th night she stayed. 9:00 p.m. The bell rang. She descended the stairs, candle in hand, just as Sarah once did. She passed the closed doors, the cold brass rails, the checkered tiles. She moved to the archive, pulled back the rug, and stepped into the circle. And there it was, a door, just as in her dream. It stood at the far wall now, arched, wooden, breathing faintly. A voice called from behind it, not cruel, not loud, gentle, familiar. "It ends when the circle breaks," it whispered. And Lydia understood. The ritual wasn't about sacrifice. It was about containment. Each death fed the circle, kept the thing asleep. But to break the circle, to shatter it entirely, would invite whatever was beyond to enter, fully, permanently. Sarah had refused. That's why she died. The others too. But Lydia, she wasn't afraid. She stepped into the center. She pulled the salt from her pocket, drew new lines, defaced the sigils one by one, chanting ancient words she barely understood. The floor trembled. The lights above flickered and burst. The walls groaned. And then the door opened. A wind like winter's scream tore through the room. Files flew, cabinets slammed. Somewhere far away, a baby cried. The ground split, and from the darkness beneath, something began to rise. And Lydia screamed, not from fear, but from understanding, because the thing behind the door had her eyes. The building collapsed hours later. Authorities blamed gas leaks, faulty renovations. No survivors were found. But in the rubble, among the splinters and char, was a single scrap of parchment, the ink smudged, the words half burned. It ends when the circle breaks. But the circle was broken, and something had come through. Today the site is vacant. Developers won't touch it. Locals cross the street rather than walk past it. Some say the land is cursed. Others say the city simply forgot. But every 7 years, someone goes missing nearby. A child, a vagrant, a clerk working late, and some nights, if you stand very still on Cannon Street, you'll hear it. The ring of a bell, far away, beneath your feet.